Hey folks, it's Jeremy, the host of Blammo. Thanks so much for listening. This is a preview of one of our exclusive shows on Patreon. These are member-supported shows, meaning they only happen because of our incredible members and community. So check out a preview of the episode, and if you like it, consider joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/Blammo, where we have tons of exclusive Blammo episodes, shows, our amazing Slack group, and we're adding new things for members all the time. If not, no worries, we still love you, and we literally have hundreds of episodes of Blammo all free for you to dive into. Thanks so much.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Dad Workwear podcast. My name is Derek Guy, and my co-host is Peter Zotolo. So, I have this weird thing where I love looking at fabrics online and imagining the clothes that could be made out of them. There are a bunch of great online sources for quality fabrics: Fox Brothers, Harrison's of Edinburgh, Dugdale, Drapers, and Anglo-Italian among them. One of my favorites is Lafayette Saté Drapés, which is a French name that I'm butchering, but hopefully French listeners will forgive me. In any case, it's a 100-year-old Parisian shop that has been in the same family for 4 generations. They sell both vintage and new fabrics and have just a tremendous collection of designs. Peter and I recently spoke to the current managing director, Virgil, about the fabric industry, his family's involvement in the trade, and what goes into the making of quality textiles. Let's dive in.
Hi, Derek.
Hey, Peter.
Good to see you. How you doing?
It's great to see you. We have a special guest today.
We do. We have Virgil from Lafayette Saté Drapés, which is
It's probably one of the best fabric stores in the world, at least if you're interested in high-end tailoring. So I'm really excited to get him on the pod to talk about the fabric business.
Yeah, and it's really the basic building blocks of what makes up a suit. So it's not just simply fabric, but how fabric can be cut. What do you look for in a fabric? What are some other things we're going to discuss?
How the fabric industry works, difference between English and Italian fabrics. Just why don't you tell us a little bit about your history, Virgil? How did you get into the fabric business?
So hi everyone. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
We're excited to have you.
So actually, I got into the fabric business because, as it happens often in this kind of field, it's a family business. So my parents were in tourism. We traveled a lot around the world. And after my studies, my grandfather was 90. And I thought it would be a good idea to go and see how the family business was running, because I didn't really know much about it.
And how old were you at this time?
So at that time, I was about 26.
Okay.
So I moved up to Paris, and then I started working with him, and learned the trade a little bit. And then after, sadly, he passed away, and I just kept going.
How long have you been in the fabric business?
Well, it's been since 2006. So it's been a while.
So this store has been in the family hands the whole time?
So the store, we're actually celebrating our 100th anniversary next year. The store.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's, we have to do something special. So the store actually belonged to the Saltiel family initially. And my grandfather, which was an Armenian immigrant, had also a sewing supplies and a fabric store, located quite close by. And when the Saltiel family decided they didn't want to be in the business anymore, they kind of, he moved to the premises and took over the company. And we, of course, kept all the fabrics that they had. So we just continued doing what they were doing and added the sewing supply business, which was one of our specialties and still is.
Is your primary specialty vintage fabrics, or do you work with kind of mills in their current books?
Actually, no. We're known by the public for our vintage fabrics because my grandfather kept all the ends of collections that we used to make, because we used to buy fabric from different mills and get bunches made for tailors. And usually at the end of the season, when you didn't sell much, you just got rid of everything and bought some new stuff. But my granddad kept them. So that's why we have a lot of vintage fabrics, and we know where they're from, and we know most of the time we know when they're from. So that's a little bit of that's the treasure that we have. But our main business is we represent British and Italian mills for fashion and tailors.
What do you feel are some of the main differences between British and Italian fabrics?
I think the easy answer is to say that British fabrics are heavier and Italian fabrics are lighter.
I've heard the same generalization. Is that mostly true?
It is actually mostly true depending on which company, because you have some British mills who produce fabrics but who distribute bunches all over the world. So they have to take into account a tailor in Singapore and then a tailor maybe, I don't know, in Norway. So the collections tend to be more complicated than just, heavier or lighter fabrics.
Would it be safe to say that Italian companies mostly make lighter fabrics and British companies mostly make heavier fabrics?
Yeah, I think at the mill level, if you are Vitale Barberis, for instance, you will make kind of lighter fabrics. And if you are maybe Fox Brothers, you will make heavier fabrics. This is actually quite true in most of the British and Italian mills. But then sometimes they just, they decide to make a new heavy collection of cavalry twills in Italy, or they'll decide to make tweeds. And then the English will decide to make lightweight cashmeres. So I think each mill in their DNA has some kind of fabric, just like Fox Brothers has flannel. Huddersfield Fine Worsted has fresco. So that's the DNA of the company, which they keep in their collections. But then after there's always some new projects, always some adaptations that are made to the market.
There's a reputation among tailoring enthusiasts that heavier fabrics are more durable than lightweight fabrics, and that really silky fabrics like super, 200s or whatever are going to be a little bit more delicate. Do you have any views on whether or not that's true?
Yeah, actually, it's funny because back maybe 40 years ago in Paris, 50 years ago, you had 1,000 tailors. And back then, tailoring wasn't really a luxurious thing. It was just something you would do because ready-to-wear was less proeminent.
Only 40 years ago?
Yeah, maybe 50 years ago, there were a lot of tailors around. Maybe
so we're talking in
like
the 80s,
70s.
tailors were common.
60s, 70s. It started going down maybe in the 80s. But wow. I remember looking back in our address books of tailors, there were a lot of people, like in Paris and the region. So, we had a lot of collections which were actually poly wools because people wanted to wash their clothes. Durability is kind of a funny thing because I see this poly wool in my collection and I think, this is probably the most durable fabric that you could buy if you wanted to make a suit. But at the same time, it's a poly wool. So, I think,
wow.
Durability is kind of course, if you have maybe a super 80, which is like twisted and maybe 400 grams, that's going to last you longer than a super 180. But do you really want that? I think the question that I ask myself these days is, how important is durability really in tailoring? I mean, do you really want to have only durable clothes, or do you want a very soft, beautiful, super 160 with silk because, just the drape will be completely different.
So is it true that those very high super numbers are necessarily more delicate than a lower supers numbers?
Yeah, I think it also has to do with the weight, of course, because if you have a super 160, which is quite heavy, it's probably going to be much more durable than a really light fabric. But if the super level is less important, it is more durable over time, for sure.
That's really interesting that you mentioned this poly wool that you said was woven in the 80s, because I think there's a lot of bias now, a belief that any kind of poly blend is necessarily either a cost-cutting measure, is going to be not very durable. I bought a cotton stretch, I bought a bespoke suit made from I think Zenyo may have been the mill if I remember correctly, from a cotton stretch fabric, and I really like it. I like it better than pure cotton. But there's this belief that poly blends are necessarily a cost-cutting measure or bad. Do you have any views on when a poly blend is okay and what does it add to a fabric?
Yeah, I think it's something we don't really see a lot these days. Mostly it's like there'll be an addition of some elastan or spandex for comfort. Especially you'll have that in as you said, like for cotton, cotton has a tendency to be there's no natural stretch in most cotton suiting fabrics. So a little bit of elastan or spandex will add the comfort that you would get from like a mid-weight wool, just because of the tightness of the weave. So I have in one of my collections, I have a Super 150 with polyester. It's actually a 50-50. The hand feel is beautiful. And it's in this case not a cost-cutting measure. It's just because it's a washable fabric. So if you want a luxury washable fabric, probably that's the kind of fabric you go for.
That sounds like something you would use for an overcoat, something without any canvassing so that you can just throw it into the wash, or a pair of trousers, a pair of pants.
Yeah, mostly it's pants because these kind of qualities are used in warm countries. Like in India, for instance, where people wear trousers a lot. I think there's it's the country where people wear the most wool trousers. And so they need to wash their clothes because it's not a luxury product. So you do go to a tailor to get them made, but it's not really a luxury product. So you need to be able to wash it at home.
How does a consumer know, just looking at a fabric, if they see a 50-50 blend or if they see any kind of synthetic, how do they know when it's still a good quality fabric versus when it's something that's bad and going to stretch out and pill or break down easily?
I think usually we have a lot of people who come here, and often they're students, and their budget is a little bit lower than the products that we have. And I think the recommendation is that if you look at the selvage, if you find a poly wool blend with a selvage, selvages are quite expensive to make, so you don't usually do it if it's a really cheap fabric. So that's always a good tip, to look for the selvage, especially if it's like a dead stock company selling it, or because that's the only thing where usually, they're fakes, but usually that'll tell you what the fabric is really made of. So yeah.
Can you explain to listeners what does selvage mean?
So basically, when you buy high quality fabrics, mostly wool, on the edge of the fabric, there's a little like a woven ribbon, which will mention usually the company who made it or the trader who's selling it. And then there's the composition. So usually maybe super 100, or it'll say 100% cashmere, so it's like a label that is applied on fabrics which are more expensive.
And you said it's difficult to make. Can you explain how does the selvage made?
It's not difficult to make. It's just that if you're going for a cheaper fabric, you're not going to bother making it because maybe you'll pay €1 a meter extra for it. So, when you're making cheaper fabrics, every cent counts. So you wouldn't make it. So probably it's a good testimony that it's a good fabric, if you see the selvage. But for poly wool blends, it's like, just to go back to your question, which is how do you see if it's a good poly wool? It's actually quite hard because sometimes the finishing in fabrics makes or breaks the hand feel of the fabric. So if it's a low quality wool with a great finishing, it can feel much better than it really is. So I think that's also kind of tricky. So there's no real answer. If it's a poly wool, it's like maybe it's good, maybe it's not. If it has a selvage, maybe that's a good sign. But just touching it, it's pretty hard.
What are some of the steps involved in finishing a fabric, whether it be wool, polyester? Because you said that the finishing is probably the most important step as far as the feel is concerned. Is that correct? And what are the steps involved in finishing a fabric?
So actually it depends. I think every finisher has their own system. In England, you have two finishers, which most people use. In Italy, sometimes it's in-house. But it's basically the way the fabric is washed, and then it's steamed, and then it's it's pressed, and they have this. It's a very long process that can go from 3 steps to maybe 8 or 9 steps.
Wow!
And it's also during that process that you would make a flannel versus just a simple what do you say, woven fabric, because that's when you would beat you beat the life out of the fabric just to make it, to mill it and to get the flannel look. I think that's quite a fascinating finishing step when you make flannel.
What are some of the changes that you've seen in the fabric industry over the course of now close to 20 years that you've been in it?
In the fabric industry, I think it was, at least on our part, it was more the arrival of fabric mills. So people who would produce fabric, who started to distribute their fabrics directly. So through a bunch business. Because in the past, you had companies like us, which were drapers. So initially, you had companies like Holland and Cherry, Dormeuil. None of us made fabric. We just used to have collections, order fabrics from mills. The mills would take care of the big bulk productions for fashion houses, maybe, for the military, for all the bigger projects, but all the tailoring parts, all the parts that was, buying in bulk and then selling in smaller quantities, that went to the drapers. And that step is, has pretty much disappeared, as most mills now run their own collections.
Meaning they sell directly to consumers.
Yes, so they create their own collection with their fabrics, or they source them sometimes from other mills. Because if you're a woolen mill, you'll never, or a worsted mill, you don't produce cotton. So you will get your cotton from someone else. So it's the same with linen. When you visit a factory, it's always they'll make 1 or 2 qualities, but you don't have companies who make linen and cotton, or you don't have companies who make wool and cotton. So when you're a merchant, you can be a factory now and be a merchant as well. That's a big change. And actually over time, maybe you had people who would directly sell to consumers through their bunches, and initially would use their own, let's say, woolen fabrics that they would make. And then they were like, maybe we should have some cotton. So then they started to source cotton from somewhere else, and then they start sourcing cashmere. And so now these companies have become kind of, they're merchants like we used to be, but with a part which is production, which is sometimes in-house. So I think it's the kind of disappearance of the smaller drapers. That's a big change. Especially it affected us quite a lot, because we went from making our own collections to representing people and their collections. So that was the big shift for us.
So in the past, my understanding of the current fabric business is that you have basically a few concentrated mills, mostly in England and Italy. And then there are kind of, I don't know what you call them, brands, I suppose, like Carnet. I don't believe Carnet weaves their own fabric. Is that correct?
Oh, Carnet. Yeah. Carnet. So, Carnet is part of the Marzotto group. So the Marzotto group, they weave all kinds of fabric because it's a huge conglomerate.
But they don't own their own mills. Am I correct?
Well, they do, because they're part of, so, Carnet is a division of the group called Ratti, and Ratti is a very famous printing, company in Italy. So
I see.
So basically, initially, they used to just distribute the fabrics from the Marzotto group. So you could say it was their mills because it's the same group. So
I see.
Yeah. And then over time, they also source some fabrics from mills which are outside of the group, because you can't really have everything.
So these brands create collections, and then they are distributed either through agents or sometimes cut lengths directly sold either to tailors or people outside of the trade. And you're saying that in the past, there used to be more drapers that would create their own collections and sell to customers. Is that correct?
Yeah. That's how it was. I think because also the volumes of sales were much higher for the mills. So they didn't want to bother about, some shop in Paris who wants to buy 500 meters when they had clients who were buying, 500,000 meters. So it's,
Right.
and as the textile industry kind of, nearly died, over time, they started thinking, okay, actually this, tailoring business, it's a pretty good idea. Why are we selling pieces to this draper in Paris or in Hong Kong or wherever when we can actually keep the profits on our end?
Is that the natural number of what a drapers would deal with? Literally, they would commission a 500-meter roll, or would it be more?
It could be more because...
Want to hear the rest? Listen to the full episode and many more other exclusive episodes over on our Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Blamo to sign up and join the Blam fam. You also get access to our exclusive members-only Slack group where we chat about this and a ton of other things. So head over to patreon.com/Blamo and we'll see you there.